with all of the gaslighting that happens in that office, I really started to even question, other people that I knew and that I loved and their authenticity. And so I was too nervous to bring it up because I didn't want to disappoint them and let them know, oh, this is what I fell victim to. And, I got myself into that. And they would have never treated me like that. But, just with how much these companies sort of mess with your minds, I started even looking at my family differently. And I was definitely ashamed. And I couldn't bring myself to say anything. So, if they saw me coming home really late, I would just, sometimes I would throw a little fib in there, which it turns my stomach now just thinking that, I even lied to my parents at the time. But, I would just say, oh, I left the store hours ago. We've just been staying with some friends, or, we were at someone's house, or, oh, we had a team night. They didn't know that I would be alone driving 2 hours south this whole time, all night long.
Michelle, you worked for Cydcor. You were a sales rep a couple years ago. So let's start there. What do you remember about the experience of selling for Cydcor?
Yeah, so when I first started, I was selling for 6 months. And after that, I got into recruiting in other areas. But for the selling part, I just remember a lot of I guess, lack of transparency. A lot of things were very vague. I didn't really know what we were going to be doing. My family didn't know what we were going to be doing when they asked me when I joined the company and when I was hired. So there just really wasn't much disclosed, but I remember just being desperate for a new role and needing to pay for college, that I wanted to find something new. And I guess for that reason, I kind of let things go over my head a little bit. But yeah, so we eventually ended up in retail, and I didn't know that we were going to be driving to stores. I didn't know that we were going to be selling for suppliers or talking about energy companies or things like that. I really had no idea what things were going to be until I was thrown out into the field on day one. So yeah.
Okay, so again, you're another example of somebody who didn't know what the job was. Seemingly, I think, amazing to many people who've never been in this. Well, how could you possibly not know what the job was until your first day? I mean, this seems to be a fairly common occurrence.
Mhm.
Was there anything else that you feel was kept from you, or that was just, it didn't seem normal in the early days of you being there?
Um, I think when I first started off, um, I couldn't really think of anything that wasn't really disclosed to me because I was really scared of asking questions.
Hmm.
So I was really timid, and I just really didn't want to stir the pot. So I guess I just didn't jump into, trying to be that person who could cause problems or bring up issues. But
Mhm.
um, anything that we tried to go over, or even ask questions about with sales, or if we ever brought up pay or things like that, it was just really dismissed. So I mean, I guess as far as things that I was confused on, or that I guess that they didn't really go into, were more of those, I guess, logistical things that they just could very easily beat around the bush with, oh,
Mhm.
yeah, we like commas in our paychecks. Or, if you tried to ask for specific numbers or anything specific, they would just kind of roll things off. So again, it was all very vague. You couldn't really get anything direct out of them.
Mhm.
Um, and so you were kind of just stuck rolling with the punches.
So what were you selling then in your time as a sales rep?
Yeah, we were doing energy services. So
Okay.
we didn't do anything door to door. The company did also work with phone and internet services, but I wasn't on that campaign for that.
Okay, so you go into this new job, this new opportunity, and Okay, now you realize what the job is. You're standing in a store selling things, and specifically it's signups for energy services.
Mhm,
Which I mean could be legitimate, right? I don't think anybody who gets
mhm.
hired to do that is suspicious of, am I doing anything that's scammy or shady or anything like that? What was that whole process like in store? Did you get people that were accusing you of scamming them? Did you feel like maybe it
Oh,
wasn't a good rate for a lot of people?
oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and there were a couple of times that I asked the people that were training me some questions, or I was really confused. And everyone in the office used to have this saying where they would just say, "Well, they don't even let the Girl Scouts come in here; they have to wait outside. So if they're letting us in, it's definitely legit." So they used to compare us to like the Girl Scout cookies, but yeah, I definitely had customers coming up to me threatening me within my first week of, you guys are just the scum of the earth, you guys raised my
Hmm.
rates, you guys got me to sign up for something I didn't authorize that. And just I had mobs of people and grown men in my face within the first week. And so that was definitely a red flag.
Yeah.
But it seemed so normal to the trainers that I was with that, they would find any reason to say, "Oh, they forgot to call her. It's on them. It's not on us. We didn't, it's not because we didn't convey all the information or weren't transparent. It's all because of the customer. It's all their fault. So you're doing just fine."
It's so honestly disturbing to hear about what these places will normalize. Um, because after a while, like you said, that was the first week when you started noticing that and you
Oh
address
yeah.
these concerns. And it's a reaffirmation that whatever you're doing is fine, and the normal day-to-day operation that you can expect is you're going to be berated by people who don't like you, but it's probably
Mhm,
because of the company you represent. Yet you also had the opposing argument there that said, well, they let us in the stores and they don't just let anybody in the stores, so that kind of
mhm,
also, so it's a great way to kind of frame the argument as, well, there's nothing wrong
mhm,
with us, even though definitely questionable things always happen with these companies. And you had mentioned early on that you used the D word, desperate, which again is
mhm.
something I hear a lot. Did you feel like that might have contributed to your willingness to accept kind of strange things like being berated by customers?
I think so.
Okay.
I think that would have definitely contributed to it to a certain degree. I had so many student loans at the time too, and the job that I had prior was just a part-time barista role, and I really wanted to start paying back my loans and for my family and things like that. And that's where they really bring in your why.
Yeah.
And they start really saying, "Oh, put your family's picture on your cell phone background," and all of these things to try to make it personal for you. And I think that's also something that takes away and distracts you from all of the disturbing things that they tend to do. And
Mhm.
they just try to make it personal and hit you in the heart with those things. So you kind of forget
Yeah.
in a way.
Yeah, they use the why to give you a sense of hope for how awful the job is, but
Mhm,
then they can also use that and have used that. We've heard many stories of them using that why to manipulate and to get you to stay longer and to maybe to get you to do things you don't want to do,
mhm,
because that is why you're there. So they're going to frame it as, well, if you have a negative attitude or whatever, you're going to disappoint this person, or whatever. They
mhm,
weaponize the why. Actually, they weaponize the step 7, um, to make it seem like, well, I'm not just letting myself down intentionally because I just don't want to do this. I'm letting down whoever else is relying on me, or at least I feel like
mhm.
is relying on me. So what made you, so you were there for 6 months as sales rep, but you said you also got into recruiting.
Mhm.
um,
Yeah.
which uses similar techniques, but is kind of a different animal. So, what made you make the leap from sales to recruiting?
Um, I definitely couldn't handle the sales. I'm too much of a passive person that it just it became really exhausting. And I guess working in a company like that, it's so hard to maintain integrity and to, ultimately you fall victim to doing the dirty sales and to, things like that. And I just my sales would take twice as long because I would read through all the fine print and I would take longer. And people are saying, "Oh, you're talking yourself out of a sale. You're saying too much. You're ruining it." And I just wanted to do things the right way. But because of that, it took my sales longer and it just took so much time and effort just to get a couple a day. And I was like, I can't do this forever. And one of the managers in the office was getting ready to promote out. He already went through his push week and he was going to open in a different state. And he said, also because you stay out in the stores so late, it's kind of
Yeah.
unsafe, for you to be walking around in a parking lot at 11, 12, 1 o'clock in the morning, leaving a store by yourself at night, 2 hours from home. So he also mentioned that, I would probably be nice at recruiting, but also he preferred me to be in a safer, probably environment. So
Mhm.
he offered that to me and I made the little transition and 10 of us all together moved out and opened up with him.
You just talked about leaving a store at midnight, 1 a.m., which, I mean, unless you're employed by that store and you're doing like the overnight freight or overnight stocking, seems kind of weird. And you had mentioned earlier about how your family didn't even really know what you were getting involved in.
Mhm.
Did you ever tell them about things like that or any other of these kind of strange things that you had to deal with? And did they ever kind of give you any feedback about what you were maybe getting involved in?
No, I didn't tell them anything.
Yeah.
I was really nervous too, and I think with all of the gaslighting that happens in that office, I really started to even question, other people that I knew and that I loved and their authenticity. And so I was too nervous to bring it up because I didn't want to disappoint them and let them know, oh, this is what I fell victim to. And, I got myself into that. And they would have never treated me like that. But, just with how much these companies sort of mess with your minds, I started even looking at my family differently. And I was definitely ashamed. And I couldn't bring myself to say anything. So,
Mhm.
if they saw me coming home really late, I would just, you know, sometimes I would throw a little fib in there, which it turns my stomach now just thinking that, I even lied to my parents at the time. But, I would just say, oh, I left the store hours ago. We've just been staying with some friends, or, we were at someone's house, or, oh, we had a team
Mhm.
night. They didn't know that I would be alone driving 2 hours south this whole time, all night long, So
Mhm.
yeah, I didn't say much.
Where do you think that feeling of shame came from? Was that because they taught you like to be your own owner, or were they just consistently presenting this idea that people not inside the organization were toxic? Like, why did you feel like you couldn't tell your support system these things that were happening to you?
I think, for the second reason that you mentioned, it's really um, they sort of paint this picture of if they're not in the organization, if they're not in the business, then they don't understand, or
Mhm.
so it's very similar, I want to say, to if people leave and suddenly it's like if you really do leave a cult and you're kind of shunned and suddenly it's they didn't have the work ethic or they weren't good enough or things like
Mhm.
that. It's they bring about a lot of shame because they won't own up to their own responsibilities, or they won't take accountability for kind of the damages that they do as a company. So I think I just started seeing the world like that too.
Mhm.
And I was just so afraid of getting the short end of the stick or getting blamed because, in these companies, you're blamed for so many things. And so I guess it transferred over into my personal life and just being afraid to be blamed for anything, whether it
Mhm.
had to do with the business or not.
Yeah, they definitely do say that people outside the business don't understand, because anybody who knows what a good working environment should be is going to take issue with things like that, with you staying at a store until 1 in the morning, with people working 60, 70 hours a week and getting paid
Hmm.
$50. It makes sense that people who aren't in it are going to raise red flags. So they have to kind of get out in front of that and say, well, yeah, we told you that was going to happen, because we know that it's going to happen.
Hmm.
So yeah, they have to kind of frame it as, well, they're the problem. It's not you. They're the problem because they don't get it.
Hmm. Yeah.
So when did you know that Cydcor was this entity? Because I feel like 99.9% of people probably have no clue what Cydcor is until they get involved in this mess. So
Yeah.
where did that whole knowledge come from?
I really didn't know that we were affiliated with Cydcor at all when we first started. And um, I did go to a conference within my first month or two of being in the business and being hired. And I still didn't, it was more of a regional conference. It wasn't one of, Cydcor's larger ones. So I still didn't know even at that time. But I want to say when I got more involved in the recruiting and onboarding, and we got into Salesforce and more of, the paperwork, and got into more of the like owners calls and things like that, was when I started understanding and then diving into that and coming across your videos too. So you actually were a big reason why I found out more about what Cydcor was, but I didn't even know we were affiliated probably until maybe about 8 months in.
Okay. So then that would, like you said, that would have been when you were on the kind of the back end, the recruiting end of this. So
Yeah.
you ended up moving. You ended up, like I think you said, with 9 other people. You helped open this new office. What was that
Mhm.
experience like, of opening a new, seemingly like a brand new independent marketing company from the ground up?
Um, it was it was strange. So, of course, which, you probably hear everybody saying, everyone lives together. And so we ended up getting two apartments. They were in the same building, but on two different floors. It was just a 3-story house with, three different apartments, one per level. Um, and so we all lived together. At first, I kind of liked it because it was my first venture out. And I thought, it was kind of nice to have roommates, and I wasn't, I was being independent and living away from my family. But it was a little bit unorthodox to, think, oh, I'm living with my owner, who's also a good friend of mine, who's also my roommate and, my boss and my
Yeah.
coworkers. And, we get to work and I have to tell them, what to do sometimes. And we come home and we're watching Disney movies and I'm really confused about boundaries. So
Yeah.
yeah, so that was, I guess the living situation was really unorthodox. And even our housing, I didn't pick our housing. A couple of the guys did, and it was just in a very terrible neighborhood, very high crime rate. And, I know that you've heard all the crazy stories about business trips in different areas like that, safety, but um, I guess that all of that social part was, I could see the fun in it, but I definitely noticed it was unorthodox.
Sure.
um, and then more of the business side, I did enjoy learning more about the business at first, and learning more of the onboarding and kind of taking up more responsibility in the office, and knowing that I didn't have to go into the field anymore was nice. And that was good at first, but recruiting, as kind of reality set in and recruiting became harder and the office wasn't making money and I was making even less as a recruiter than a salesperson and working just as much, if not more. And so at first it seemed like this really big, exciting, grand opening. And then as time went on, it just was settling in more and more that this isn't going to be long term. This is not going to work out. And I don't think that I necessarily want this, but
Yeah.
I cared so much about everyone who was involved that I just stayed.
So how long were you all living in the same house?
We were there for about another 6 months, and
Okay.
slowly everyone just trickled out or quit. And yeah, it was pretty much down to my owner and I and one other person at the very end of that. And then he made another move. So
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah, you brought up I think you used the perfect word, boundaries,
Mm,
because I think it's a goal for everyone to strive to create those boundaries between work and social life and home life.
mhm,
Whereas in these situations, they don't exist. And
right.
that's intentional. Cydcor doesn't want those boundaries to exist because they want you to dedicate your whole self to Cydcor.
Mhm.
So even if you're not at work, you're still living with these people. So you're spending 24 hours a day with these people. I mean, you have no other social circle. You have no other outlet. It's these people. And I I feel like it has to get awkward though at some point when like you're all living together, but the the average tenure of someone in one of these companies is very short. So, did you have people that quit but were still living there, or did they move out pretty quickly? Like, how do you remember things like that going?
Um, it was pretty awkward. So we actually, when we went and we opened up this new office, we joined another office. So we were kind of in conjunction with another office building. So we were in the same building, but we were technically two separate ICLs.
Mhm.
And they came from the same office that we originally came from in New York as well. So we all already knew each other. But at one point, one of the employees that actually moved down with us and the ICL that I opened up, he just didn't like our owners. So he stayed there, but he switched to the other ICL in the same office building and stayed in our apartment, same situation, but all of his sales were now going under the other ICL owner that we shared an office with. So it just kind of became really awkward. People started choosing sides, and when people would quit, eventually they did start moving out, and uh, some people were just going back to live with their families again, and were just totally done. So um, yeah, and this was actually right before COVID, a couple months before COVID, and things like that. And
Mhm.
so eventually, when people started quitting, we were also losing our stores, and we saw another market opening up in a different area. So my owner kind of saw it as, oh, well, everyone's quitting anyway. And, it looks like we could have a brand new market. So I guess it's a good time to just up and rebrand again. So yeah, it slowly trickled out, and then we just started all over again.
Okay. So now, move number two, how far away are you from your home?
We actually went back to New York, but we went
Oh,
to
you did.
Western New York. So it was
Okay.
actually farther than our other area, but it was back in our original state. So um,
Okay.
yeah, it was about, oh my gosh, I want to say maybe almost 4 hours of a drive from our
Okay.
original home. So yeah.
Okay. So at this time, you've been in for well over a year.
Mhm.
Do you have any type of social life? Like, what are the connections between you and old friends, family? What's that situation like?
It's pretty non-existent. I tried to get plugged into a few other places while we were moved out in other areas away from our original, my hometown.
Mhm.
But it was also before COVID, and then COVID had just started. So I got plugged into a church, which, that means a lot to me, but with restrictions and things, we couldn't go to in-person services. So that community was kind of cut off for me. And then um, As far as friends and family, I, still kind of basic phone calls with my family, but we never talked about the business. It
Hmm.
was just kind of updates with how everyone's doing and, work for them and how my brothers are doing. But I never discussed what we were kind of doing on our end behind the scenes. And I maintained communication with maybe one friend here and there,
Mhm.
but it was business people, business people, business people only. So
So, okay. So now you go to this third office, technically, a second office that you helped open up. What is that like? Are you living with another group of people? What's your mental state at this point about continuing on with this company?
so at this point, so this move was right after our first initial launch, and so everyone had quit. So
Mhm.
it was basically just myself and my owner and one other person. Everyone else was gone. So by the time we were in this new market, it was just the three of us, and we were in one apartment, and we were basically trying to run this facade like we were this high end company with
Yeah.
only three people behind it, which is really exhausting and really just horrible to think about because it's just smoke and mirrors, and to think about all the lies in the facade, just it is something that brings about shame.
Mhm.
But as far as still being in the business, I think I almost that made me want to stay even more at that point. And I knew I was more sketched out at that point and more things. It was just running into red flag after red flag. But because there were less of us, my owner seemed even more desperate. And he
Mhm.
was like, if you go, I lose everything. We're going to have to go on a retrain and just everything. And so I felt even more weight and more pressure that I had to stay because
Mhm.
his dream was so important to do this. And I really didn't want to let him down. So, and just the thought of, oh, everyone else quit. I'm like the last man standing who's been loyal. If I give up on him, then, I'm going to be
Mhm.
like everyone else who just gave up on him, and I'm going to be a horrible person. So I think it made me dive even deeper into it, which I wish that I didn't.
Yeah. That's a lot of weight to put on one person, though, to say, well, if you leave, I lose everything in a sense. That's unfair, number one. And number two, especially since as an owner, you're supposed to be living the high life. And
Right.
he even used the word retrain with
Yeah.
you.
Mhm.
And did he go into any detail about what that was or what that would mean for him?
Not much. All I knew, I didn't even know too many details about what a retrain was, but
Mhm.
all I knew was from his perspective, it wasn't something that he wanted to do because it would be going back a step for him.
Sure.
And um, all I knew was we didn't want that. So whatever we can do to avoid that, you do it. So yeah, and again, I think it made it harder with those lack of boundaries because he would confide in me as a friend, oh, I'm struggling, oh, money is tough, and oh, if I lose you, like, I can't imagine what's going to happen.
Mhm.
um and I'm like, oh, are you talking to me as an owner, like putting the pressure on me, or are you just confiding in me as a friend? Or
Yeah.
I'm not too sure which hat to wear right now. So it was hard to, do I support him or do I be honest, or, do I just, fall into this all over again or be guilty? I'm not sure. So
Hmm.
yeah, definitely a lot of pressure.
I want to ask you a personal question, and this can end up being cut. It's up to you. I just want to put it out there. But I'm sure you've heard plenty of examples of relationships that go beyond employee and go beyond friend in these companies.
Mhm.
You're a beautiful young woman. Like you said, this is your first kind of venture out, and you're actually living with people that you really don't know apart from
Yeah.
this Cydcor universe.
Mhm.
So, did you ever feel any pressure to cross that line?
I knew it was going on. I knew that it
Okay.
was normalized, but I knew it was something that I did not want.
Okay.
I knew going to conferences and even being on the org calls or talking to other recruiters, hearing them say, "Oh yeah, that owner, he's married to his recruiter," or "Oh, they've hooked up," or "Oh, this and that," and it, any sort of sexual talk was very common in the
Mhm.
office. Toxic talk was just anything unprofessional that you could think of was very normal to just talk about in the office. Whether it was from owner to recruiter or just salesperson to other rep or whatever it may be. I didn't get into that at all. I just didn't feel comfortable with it. But I think that there is definitely a lot of pressure for, those relationships to form because, especially if both people like the business and they see, I guess, the opportunity in it,
Yeah.
then they will, they agree and they kind of have the same mindset. And people will say, "Oh, yeah, they're two go getters. They're perfect for each other." But, my owner fell in love with the business and he loved it. But I just knew it wasn't what I wanted and it wasn't attractive to me. So,
Mhm.
yeah, that was never, never ever a thing for me.
Okay. So you kind of saw your time in Cydcor as a means to an end. Like this is not something that you wanted to do for 20 odd years. Maybe
Mhm.
get some experience, make a little bit of money, and then move on to something else. So around the time you opened that second office, like you said, you were kind of already experiencing or at least recognizing a lot of red flags, a lot of things that didn't seem right. And you also had that additional weight of essentially being told you can't quit. Otherwise, you end this whole experience for me from your owner. So um eventually you did though. You and I are talking today. So what led you to that? What was kind of the process of getting out?
Um, I think I just really crumbled under all of it. So we um we went through COVID and again sketchy thing after sketchy thing, which I'm sure you've heard in every single other video of yours. And we ended up moving right back to our hometown about 6 months later during COVID. So we made a
Mm,
third move. I was just really tired, and we stayed for a couple of months, and then he ended up moving to a brand new area again, and I just didn't want to do that. And um, so I stayed in that office, our original office that I did sales in, but I moved to a recruiter role. Did that for 6 months, stayed because I just felt like I had to take care of everybody. And then my original owner reached back out to me and said, "Hey, can you do remote recruiting for me? I think it would be cool to work together again." And I think being a remote recruiter was what destroyed me. That was the hardest thing, trying to have the weight of a whole office on your shoulders. And especially when you're in a different place and you don't have a support system, you
yeah,
don't go to team nights, you don't get to hang out with everybody, you're all alone and everyone's opportunities is all on your shoulders. Everyone's happiness is either all your fault or, it's all basically based on you. I really cracked under all of that pressure and knowing that there's really no place for, I guess, a recruiter, also really made it more definitive for me that you can't get any more opportunity from this and that you're
mhm,
basically if you're a recruiter you're going to be making calls the rest of your life. I mean, they even kind of tell you when you're in sales that, "Oh, there's an opportunity to be an owner, you'll move up and it's great." But if you're a recruiter there's really no advancement. And so I just kept thinking, I can't get screamed at on the phone all day long. I just have to believe that God has a better plan for me than this because I
yeah.
can't do it forever. So um, yeah, I definitely cracked and I couldn't do it anymore.
So had your owner kind of moved on from making you stay at that point? Like, what was that conversation like when you said, "Okay, this is it, I'm done"?
So yeah, the very last conversation,
Yeah,
it was a full-on breakdown. And I don't normally do that. I'll kind of hold it in for a while because again, as a recruiter, you don't have much of a support system, especially if you're remote. Um, and with all that pressure, which is ironic because you're also very replaceable. So there's a
sure.
lot of pressure, but also they don't really care too much. So for me, I really struggled with that, but I really just tried to hold it in as much as I could for a while because there's really no one to talk to and there's no one to really get it out. So you sort of have to suck it up.
Mhm.
And then after a while, I ended up having a phone call with someone who came in for about 2 interviews. It was all virtual, it was all on Zoom, and he was such a sweet candidate. He was very wise, deserved something so much better than this, as everybody else does. And as a recruiter, you're also a band-aid. So you have to fix all the problems in the office, and anything that goes wrong falls back on you. It's usually always your fault. Um, and any decision that the owner, anyone makes, it comes back on you. You have to fix everyone because you're HR. So this person, he was a candidate who did 2 interviews with us and then was offered the role. And I get a phone call from him, and he starts screaming at me. You guys didn't tell me we were going to be standing in Walmart. This is so stupid. This is ridiculous. You guys are just the scum of the earth. I can't believe that, you guys are lying to me. You took up all of my time. And he just went off for 20 minutes and I just let him go because I had no argument. It was absolutely true. Everything, all of the deceit, I mean, it was 100% true. And I was also really nervous that he would take out his anger on my owner or write reviews and things like that, which again, I have to kind of save the owner all the time.
Mhm.
So I just took the beating and
Mhm.
he his feelings were 100% valid. And I I was almost grateful though that he found out and moved on because he was a great candidate and a great person and deserved so much better. Um, but as soon as he hung up, I called my owner bawling. And I'm not normally one to cry in front of other people or to really, I'm usually composed, but
Mhm.
I called him and I completely broke down. I said, this really is BS. And I don't swear, but I swore. And I reiterated everything that the gentleman said on the phone with me. I said, I think this really is a scam. I don't see a future in it. I know your heart is in it, and I don't want to offend you or invalidate your feelings, but I can't keep doing this. It's wrong. It feels wrong. I feel awful about myself. I don't feel like I'm even authentic anymore. I feel like I'm losing my own genuine integrity to a pitch and being a
Mhm.
phone call. And I don't like that. I don't want to change for this. And so, yeah, I kind of just exploded it all out on him. And we talked the next day and we agreed that eventually this was going to end and he was going to look for a replacement and I was not going to come back.
Just a little tiny thing that you mentioned, or that I wanted to pull out. You had talked about being HR,
Mhm.
which sounds so strange when you think about what real HR is.
Yeah.
Um, so, how did you how did you handle things like that? Because you had mentioned earlier about, the sexual talk that was
Yeah.
normal in the office and other things that in a normal HR environment would not be tolerated. So did
Correct.
you, as the band-aid, as the
Mhm.
person who kind of always had to take the brunt for the owner, was there ever any situations where you had legitimate HR issues that you somehow had to handle?
Um, yes. And it was really hard because a lot of the time that we had issues like that, they could happen from rep to rep, but a lot of the times it was the managers or the higher ups that I had to report these issues with. They were the ones causing those issues. So or if it was personal, it was, experiences that I was having with other people inappropriately, acting
Yeah.
with me in the office or customers and things like that. And so um, it's weird thinking, oh, do I report this to myself or I don't know what to do. And so I've reported things and mentioned them to my owner, especially ones that I've gone through, and all that they've ever done was just pretty much blow them off. If they weren't things that came directly from management or owners, misbehaving.
Mhm.
If I did go to them for an issue, um, I've never really seen them reprimand anybody, and they do have in their paperwork policies against harassment, but I've never seen them take initiative about anything that I've ever brought up, which is sad and scary because safety was always a big concern for me, and it was just more proof that they didn't care about their employees or anyone's safety or anything like that. It's just a machine that needs numbers and sales and money. So
Sure.
yeah.
Yeah. So you got out after essentially 2 years, it seems like, in
Mhm.
Cydcor. Um, Once you were able to make that disconnection, did you kind of have this moment where life went back to a real kind of normal, or like what was that whole situation like trying to adapt to life after Cydcor?
Um, I think I'm still adapting.
Okay.
um, so I would say the best way to probably describe that is when people say you don't realize how good something is until it's gone, I would say it's the opposite of that. So I didn't really realize how bad things were until I was officially gone and got a better job that was not unorthodox, and being in a safe, normal working environment, thinking, wait, so we don't talk like that, and we don't act this way, and we don't disrespect each other, we don't let things like this fly, we're not professional or inappropriate. So I didn't really realize how low of things that I was settling for were until I was in a different, better, normal environment where it should be. And I think I'm still trying to almost undo and untrain myself from all of the constant drilling of sales techniques and things that they tell you to do. Um, because for a while, I noticed myself getting really psychologically impacted by this. And I know a lot of people talk about, the investment with their cars and money and things like that, which, you can you expect to heal by once you get a new job and things, but you don't really quite expect the psychological impact. And that's been the part that's taken me the longest. I think I started getting skeptical of everybody and
Mhm.
thinking everyone's a salesperson, everyone's trying to CPR me and build me and use all these techniques on me. And so I started really questioning everyone around me, even after I left the business.
Mhm.
Just thinking that everyone's in it for something and everyone wants something out of me. It's just all a facade. Everyone's a salesperson. And
Yeah.
um, I still kind of have that mentality that I'm trying to untrain myself and get all of that out. But
Yeah.
it's become a weird habit. And yeah, it's made relationships hard and things like that. So yeah.
Mhm. Which I would definitely say that a certain amount of um I don't even want to use the word suspicion or skepticism, maybe critical thinking. A certain amount of critical thinking
Mhm,
is a good thing,
mhm,
but yeah, I can definitely see how um, having gone through what you've gone through, it can lead to these thoughts of distrust, right? And even in your message, you talked about difficulty trusting others, building relationships, and believing in people's authenticity. I think when you dedicate 2 years of your life to something, and after you get out and after you're away from, like you said, the constant drilling of sales tactics, because you were being sold to that whole time too, and not just the
mhm,
people that were working in the stores. or door to door,
Right.
you were being sold to, and you come to find out, well, everything that I was sold was essentially not true, either a blatant lie, or it was framed and bent and skewed in a way that seemed truthful at the time, but was behind all of this deception. And there is kind of like that getting out of a cult mentality, because if you grew
Hmm.
up in a cult, that's all you know. Now you're completely free from that indoctrination, and you're free from having to listen to conference calls and ownership calls and
Yeah.
recruiting calls and morning atmosphere. And
Hmm.
now it's kind of like, well, what do I believe now? Like, it's almost
Yeah.
like I need someone to tell me what to believe, because
Yeah.
now I have the power to make my own decisions and to think my own way, but I almost kind of don't remember how to do that.
Hmm.
um and it's frightening for a lot of people too, because like you, I mean, it's been, a couple years almost, or around, since you've been out of Cydcor.
Hmm.
um for most individuals, after a couple years, like you said, the financial situation tends to improve itself at least a little bit, depending on how deep you get into it. The car
Hmm.
situation might. But yeah, psychological trauma takes a while to heal. um it takes people a long time, depending on what the trauma is, to get over it, and to in a lot of cases not get over it, continue life with it. um and that's something that you said you're still struggling with even after all this time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm.
I don't think that the word trauma is probably an understatement. um, but it feels like that. It feels like they, kind of find people who are naive or desperate, and you know, they don't quite know what they're getting themselves into, and they don't know what's happening, and they get in too deep, and they get involved and invested, and ultimately it just becomes so toxic and damaging. Even the toxic positivity and the gaslighting, just so many different things. And then whether they quit or they're kind of chucked back in the water and thrown back out into the world with no floaties, or nothing
Mhm.
to help them out. They've been brought into this company and damaged, and then they're just kind of chucked back out there and expected to find normalcy again. And we're like, wait, what is that? I don't know. So um yeah, it just seems like they're kind of this revolving door of, oh, we'll take whoever we can get. And if they're just hurt by it, or if they've gotten bad repercussions, that's kind of on them. They have to go build their life back up again.
Yeah. When you reached out to us, you concluded your message, by telling your intent behind this whole thing, because nobody is forced to tell their story here. All the stories that we hear from people, they come forth on their own volition. Sometimes takes me a while to get back to those who reach out, because we have so many. But to read from your message, you talked about how you have no malintent. You didn't name any persons, name any companies. You don't want to see really anybody um, negatively affected by anything that you say. Your main goal here is to possibly help someone who was in your position notice the red flags a little bit sooner, and maybe take action,
Mhm.
and get out a little bit sooner rather than later. So I guess what you're obviously doing that, but to somebody who maybe comes across this video and might be having their suspicions, kind of like you were, what should they look for? What questions should they ask? What should they expect to find out or expect to see that might start punching a hole in that facade and get them out a little bit earlier?
um yeah, I think a lot of the wonderful things that you've mentioned in your videos of, specific things to, look out for in those kind of cult like techniques, and some of the chantings and the sayings. And I think all of those things are, very common to see too. And, even from the ads and, all of those things. But I would really just stress using your wisdom and discernment when you're initially applying, when you do your research, and looking into validity into companies. um, just trusting your instinct, because a lot of people are younger and they're straight out of even just high school, as early as
Yeah.
high school or college, and they really are, like we mentioned, desperate. And to just sort of do your research, and if you are even getting into the interview process, if they're really at a fast pace, if they're just as desperate too, that might be a crazy sign. If they're trying to get you in and out, if it sounds very robotic or scripted, or like they're really trying to butter you up, just really take caution. I would say is probably the bigger thing for me. And yeah, I guess just the last thing that I would ever want to know or see is just more and more people just getting sucked into it and thrown back out in there. So and I think to don't be afraid to speak up or to say anything, because I'm just now learning how to not be a chronic people pleaser. And so they really took advantage of that, when I was part of the business. And so, you know, you can also know your worth, and, don't be afraid to speak up. Or, if you're not seeing respect happening in an office, you don't have to be gaslit. You're free to leave, and it's not your fault. You deserve love and respect, and, wherever you go. And so, don't be afraid to know what you deserve in the company and to leave that if you're not getting that, which happens to be very common in something like this.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think in general, just as early as the ad, or, even just your personal, what you expect out of a company, if you're not getting that, don't let fear kind of keep you from jumping the ship if you have to, or guilt or anything like that.